The History of Israel Part 5. Although it's crucial to understand the background I described in the previous videos, this is the part that best describes the conflict we see today. Because in this part, we're going to talk about a war that started 76 years ago. The root of the conflict lies in the fact that one side believed this war never ended. Let's break it down. 1947, the UN votes in favor of the partition plan, splitting the land to a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Arabs, as usual, refused, just as they did in 1937, 38, and 45. They were strongly against any Jewish state, so in order to stop the UN's decision, they launched an offensive the morning after the UN declaration and attacked a Jewish bus, killing 5 civilians. Thus began the Palestine War. During this phase, this civil war, the British forces were still present in Israel, trying to avoid escalation. During the first 4 months, the Arabs were attacking Jews in mixed cities, while also sabotaging main roads all across the country. Their strategy was to terrorize the Jews and make them leave. During this phase, the Jews were mainly defending and trying to send supplies to places that were cut off. But that all changed in the month of April. The Jewish casualties were so high and the supplies so thin that some countries, including the United States, started to doubt the ability of the Jews to defend themselves. The dream of a Jewish state was drifting away, and the Jewish leaders had to do something drastic. So they executed Plan Dalet, Plan D, which marks the start of a Jewish offensive, with a goal to seize the territories designated to the Jewish state in the UN's partition plan and to form a geographic contiguity. And this is where things get complicated, because in these territories there were around 400,000 Arabs. Most of them lived in mixed cities alongside Jews. According to the UN, these Arabs would have the option to join the Arab state or stay where they live and gain citizenship and full rights in the Jewish state. Unfortunately, many of them chose option number 3, start a war against their Jewish neighbors. During the execution of Plan D, and I'm going to be as straightforward as I can, Arab villages were destroyed and Arabs were forced out of their homes. That is a fact. But it is also a fact that many of those Arabs took arms against the Jews, and many of those villages were actually battlefields. It is also a fact that many of the displaced Arabs chose to leave, as stated by the Palestinian historian Nadim Bawalsa. In any war, you do your best to avoid putting yourself in harm's way. My mother's family left their home in Talia and went to Cairo, where they had family. They went thinking that they would wait it out. Do you understand? The Arabs started a war, and then they decided they didn't want to live in the middle of a war and left their home with an intention to come back after winning. The only thing is, they lost. So now they complain about the outcome of a war they started. Again, I'm not going to deny this. Atrocities were being performed in this war, and there are Arabs who were wrongfully and forcefully displaced, and that is horrible. But you must remember a few things. 1. The vast majority of the Arabs left on their own accord because they didn't want to be around a war they started. 2. Those who didn't take arms against the Jews and stayed in the Jewish territories became citizens with equal rights. 3. The number of atrocities committed by the Jewish forces is much lower than what pro-Palestinians claim nowadays. I mean, if you ask them about these atrocities, I guarantee that every single one of them will give you the exact same answer. Bir Yassin. It was a village in which a battle took place, causing the death of 5 Jews and 100 Arabs, many of whom civilians, including women and children. As an Israeli and a Jew, I am ashamed of this horrible event, and you will not hear me justify it, but I will say that the reason everyone keeps mentioning Deir Yassin and Deir Yassin only is that there weren't many events like this. Deir Yassin was a very rare event. Also, those pro-Palestinians will never admit that in any war since the dawn of man, atrocities were being performed on both sides. I mean, 5 days after Deir Yassin, Arab forces launched an attack against a medical convoy bringing supplies to Hadassah Hospital, killing 80, most of them doctors and nurses, who were stuck in 2 buses and burned alive by the Arab attackers. Anyway, after an 8-week offensive, in which half of the Arabs who lived in the Jewish territories were displaced, Plan D had come to an end on May 14, 1948. The reason for that is that the British had finally left. The mandate was officially over, and David Ben-Gurion announced the establishment of the State of Israel, according to the UN's decision. And on the morning right after, the armies of Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq, supported by forces from Yemen, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia, invaded Israel and launched simultaneous attacks in all directions. And I'm sorry for another cliffhanger, but we'll continue on part 6.